What would you do if a starving stray dog sat beside you in the rain, and that single moment of compassion led to a miracle that changed hundreds of lives? The wind sliced through the narrow underpass like a razor, howling between concrete columns as rain fell in relentless sheets. It wasn't the kind of drizzle that passed you by, it was the kind that soaked you to the bone, and it made no distinction between skin, soul, or spirit. Beneath that bridge, tucked into the shadow of a pillar, sat a man, Jack Callahan. Once a builder of homes, now with no door of his own to close. He sat on a flattened piece of cardboard, knees tucked to his chest, arms crossed tight over a jacket that had lost its warmth long ago. His boots were cracked at the soles, his hands red and raw from too many nights without shelter. 6 months earlier, Jack had still been someone. A carpenter with calloused hands and strong shoulders. A man who built things that lasted porches where children played, cabinets families argued over during remodels, staircases worn down by time and life, but all that ended the day the fire took his workshop. And that came just after another kind of fire, the one that took his wife. Grief didn't knock. It simply walked in, sat on his chest and refused to move. After the funeral, bills went unpaid, clients disappeared, the insurance money never came. One thing broke, then another, and then, like a domino line he didn't know he'd built, his whole life fell. Jack didn't leave home one day and become homeless. It happened in pieces, a late payment, a notice, a plea ignored. Eventually, the streets weren't a worst-case scenario. They were just the next chapter. And so, here he was, on a damp patch of concrete, with the sound of passing cars overhead, each one a reminder that life was still moving for someone else. He pulled a sandwich from his backpack, white bread, bologna, and mustard saved from the shelter's lunch handout. It wasn't fresh, but it was food. His stomach growled. Then he saw it, just beyond the edge of the pillar, near a puddle glinting in the dim orange light. Something moved. A shadow at first. Then, unmistakably a dog, a German shepherd, walked. Ribs showing beneath the matted fur. Its ears twitched as it sensed Jack, but it didn't run. It didn't even flinch. Jack leaned forward, slowly, cautiously. "Well, look at you," he muttered, more to himself than the animal. "A fellow wanderer, huh?" The dog said nothing. Just stared, eyes dark, cautious, but not aggressive. Like it had long stopped expecting kindness, but still remembered what it looked like. Jack looked down at his sandwich, then back at the dog. "Guess there's enough for two." He tore the sandwich clean in half, crawled forward on his knees, rain soaking through the denim, and laid one piece just out of his reach. Then, just as slowly, backed away. The dog waited, then crept forward, sniffed, and in 2 quick bites the food was gone. Jack didn't speak again. He just watched, and the dog just stayed. Something inside Jack, a muscle he thought had long since stopped working, softened. He peeled off his jacket, a shell of what it once was, and crawled back toward the dog. "Come on, buddy," he whispered. "This old thing's seen better days, but so have we." The dog didn't growl, didn't retreat, just watched as Jack draped the coat over its wet body, tucking the corners gently beneath its belly. It stood there for a beat, then curled into a tight ball beneath the makeshift shelter. Jack eased down beside it, against the concrete wall. The cold bit into his arms now, but the silence felt shared. He could feel the dog's breathing, slow, steady, real, a rhythm he hadn't tuned into in months. Jack let out a soft laugh, dry, cracked, but real. "You know what, pal?" he said. "If I win the lottery tomorrow, you and me, steak, real plates, maybe even cloth napkins." The dog didn't answer, but it didn't leave either. That night, they stayed like that. 2 souls in a storm. 1 man, 1 dog. bound not by blood or ownership, but by the quiet desperation of being forgotten and the unexpected grace of being seen. Morning didn't arrive with sunshine. It arrived in silence, wrapped in a dull grey light that slid reluctantly through the cracks between buildings and bridges. Rain had stopped, but the world was still soaked heavy with yesterday's sorrow. Jack Callahan stirred. The pain in his joints was the first thing to greet him, followed by the cold that clung to his skin like an old regret. He blinked, sat up slowly, and glanced to his left. The jacket, the one he'd draped over the dog, was still there. So was the dog. Curled into itself, snug beneath the thin layer of fabric, the German Shepherd lifted its head and looked at him. The eyes were alert, but calm. Jack didn't know what surprised him more, that the dog hadn't run off during the night, or that he somehow expected it to stay. "You still with me, huh?" he murmured, voice hoarse. He reached out, hand open and slow, and scratched gently behind one of the dog's ears. It leaned into his touch, just slightly. But enough. Jack smiled, a small, unfamiliar curve that hadn't touched his face in weeks. They set off together just after sunrise. Jack didn't have a plan, but then again, he hadn't had one in a long time. Most mornings he drifted from alley to alley, checking behind bakeries or church kitchens for forgotten scraps. Today he walked slower. Not because of the pain, though there was that, but because he had company now. The dog stayed close. Light on its feet, alert but not skittish. A shadow with warm breath and quiet steps. He wasn't sure why it followed him. Maybe hunger. Maybe instinct. Maybe it just felt something in him. Something familiar. As they crossed a parking lot near the bus station, Jack's stomach rumbled loud enough to make the dog glance sideways. He chuckled. Yeah, I hear you," he said. The scent of coffee drifted from a shop on the corner. Jack nodded politely to a woman unlocking the door, but didn't stop. He didn't belong inside places like that, not anymore. Then he saw the stand. A cardboard box filled with scratch-off tickets. A boy in a red hoodie sitting beside it, swinging his legs and humming a tune only he knew. The boy barely looked up as Jack passed. But the dog stopped, then barked, loud. Sudden, Jack stumbled forward, startled. "Hey!" "What?" The dog barked again, then sat, still, staring at Jack, waiting. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't fear. It was deliberate, focused. Jack looked from the dog to the stand, then back again. A memory surfaced, half joking, half hopeful. "If I win the lottery tomorrow, you and me steak." "Real plates," Jack sighed. "You remembered that, huh?" He reached into his jeans pocket, dug around. His fingers closed around 2 soft, damp bills. $2. That was it. He looked at the dog, who hadn't broken eye contact. "All right," Jack muttered. "Let's be fools together." He stepped up to the boy. "One scratch off, whatever your luckiest one is." The boy grinned, handed over the ticket. Jack took it, walked over to the wall of a convenience store, and crouched under the awning. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out an old quarter one he kept for emergencies. He ran it over the silver surface slowly, methodically. Nothing. Then something. A line. A number. A symbol. He paused, scratched again. His breath caught. The symbols matched, the numbers aligned. He blinked, then looked again, heart hammering. $250,000. He just stared. Not moving, not speaking. The dog trotted over, tail wagging slightly, tongue out, head tilted like it already knew. "You've got to be kidding," Jack whispered. He laughed, then not the quiet, bitter kind, but a sharp, stunned, joyful laugh that cracked something open inside him. He reached down, scooped the dog into his arms and spun right there on the sidewalk. The world had not changed, not the broken sidewalks or the faded storefronts, but Jack had. Because in that moment something returned that had been missing for too long. Possibility. 10 minutes later, they were seated at a small sidewalk diner, chrome chairs, red plastic tablecloths, and a waitress with tired eyes and a sharp ponytail. Lucky Jack decided the name suited him, sat across from him, perched politely on a chair. The waitress approached with raised brows.
"He eats with you?" Jack nodded, voice steady. "Real plates, like I promised." She looked at the dog, then back at Jack.
Something in her face softened. "You got it. 2 steak dinners, medium rare. Mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables, and a side of bacon because why not?" When the plates arrived, Lucky's tail thumped against the seat like a small drum. Jack sliced a piece of steak and placed it gently on Lucky's plate. The dog took it with care. No rush, no bite, just gratitude in motion. Jack sat back, watched him and whispered, "We made it, buddy." We really made it. Jack Callahan had never been the kind of man to believe in luck. He believed in effort, in wood and nails, in sanding a rough plank until it was smooth, in building something from nothing and knowing it would last. But somewhere between the fire that took his workshop and the silence that followed his wife's final breath, belief had become a memory, something others still had the luxury to hold on to. That night under the bridge, as the rain fell in cold vertical lines and the wind moaned through broken concrete, he had spoken more out of reflex than hope. "If I win the lottery tomorrow," he'd told the dog, "you and me steak, real plates." It was a throwaway line. A flicker of humor, or maybe desperation, dressed as wit. But something about the way the dog Lucky, though he hadn't been named yet, had looked at him afterward, like he understood. It had stuck with Jack. Now, sitting at a diner booth across from a dog that once curled in a puddle for warmth, Jack couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. About how ridiculous it had sounded, and about how it had somehow come true. 2 steak dinners. Real plates, a dog at his table, people whispering. Some watching, others smiling. The world didn't make sense anymore. And for the first time in a long time, that wasn't a bad thing. Jack had always considered promises sacred. Maybe it was the way he was raised. Maybe it was being a craftsman, someone who knew that what you said had to stand up the way your work did. But after losing everything, he'd stopped making them. What was the point of promising anything to anyone when the future itself was a fog? Yet here he was, living inside a promise he never intended to keep because some part of him never believed it could happen. And somehow that made it more real. After the meal, he paid in cash all crisp bills and left a tip bigger than the cost of the meal itself. The waitress blinked when she saw it. "I think you made someone's week," she said with a half laugh. Jack just smiled. Someone made mine first. Outside, the sky had cleared, the kind of blue that only comes after a storm. Bright but still cool, as if the world had been scrubbed clean. He looked down at Lucky. The dog sat proud and upright. Fur still a little patchy from the rain, but eyes alert, strong, present. Jack knelt beside him. "You know what, buddy? You didn't just remind me to keep a promise. You made me remember I can make them again." Lucky tilted his head slightly, like he was listening, or maybe just waiting for the next step in their quiet journey. They didn't go far that night. Jack found a modest motel just a few blocks from the diner. It wasn't fancy chipped siding, flickering sign, but it had clean sheets and a heater that worked. He checked in under his real name for the first time in months. When they got to the room, Lucky did a few small laps around the floor, sniffing each corner, then jumped onto the bed, curled into a circle, and let out a long, satisfied sigh. Jack sat on the edge of the mattress watching him. His heart felt tight, not from fear or grief this time, but from something heavier. Realization. "This money," he said softly, "isn't just mine. It came from that night, from that moment. From you." Lucky stirred, lifting his head but not moving closer, just watching. "And I know," Jack continued, "I'm not supposed to think like that. People say luck is random, that it's chance, but I don't think that's what this was. You reminded me what kindness feels like, even when I didn't deserve it. Jack thought about the rain, the cold concrete, the way Lucky had crept toward half a sandwich like it was salvation, and how he, a man who had nothing, gave something anyway. That had to mean something, right? The world didn't need another man with a lucky break and a bank account. It needed someone who remembered what it felt like to have nothing. Someone who wouldn't forget where he came from the moment the clouds parted. Jack stood and crossed to the window. The lights of the city blinked back at him. Not in judgment, not in invitation, just there. I don't want to waste this, he whispered. Behind him, Lucky jumped off the bed, padded over, and nudged his leg softly. Jack looked down. So maybe we figure this out. Together. The next morning, Jack made a list on a napkin. It wasn't fancy. Just scratchy handwriting in blue pen, uneven and slanted. 1. Get Lucky to a vet. 2. Find clothes that don't smell like the street. 3. Figure out what shelters near here need help. 4. Talk to someone about opening a workshop again. 5. Don't forget what the bridge felt like. 6. Keep the promise and make new ones. 7. Stay human. He folded the napkin and slid it into his pocket like a map, not to escape, but to return to dignity, to purpose, to himself. The next morning felt different, not because the sun was any brighter or the city any kinder, but because Jack Callahan woke up in a warm room on a clean bed with a dog sleeping soundly at his feet. For a moment, he didn't move, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of Lucky's breathing. It had been months since he'd slept without shivering. Months since he'd opened his eyes to anything other than cold concrete and a sky that felt indifferent. He sat up slowly, legs stiff, back sore, but it was a different kind of ache. Not from survival, from rest. Lucky stirred at the sound, lifting his head and letting out a soft chuff. His eyes met Jack's, and the connection was immediate, like a nod between old friends. Jack leaned over and rubbed behind the dog's ears. "Morning, partner," he whispered. "Ready to see what the day brings?" Lucky's tail gave a slow, sleepy thump against the bed. Jack showered his first real one in weeks and changed into the clean set of clothes he'd picked up at the thrift store the night before. The collar on the button-up shirt was a little frayed, but it didn't matter. He looked like someone again. Not invisible, not broken, just Jack. They stepped out into the city together, man and dog, side by side, not knowing that something extraordinary was waiting just a few blocks away. They wandered for a while, like they always did. No destination, just a walk. Jack let Lucky take the lead sometimes, letting the dog sniff at lampposts and curbs and bushes. Occasionally, Lucky would pause and look back at him, as if asking, "This way?" And Jack would shrug and follow. The street buzzed with early morning life. Cars zipped by. A few commuters rushed into coffee shops. A couple of kids chased each other around a bus stop bench. Jack nodded politely to a man sweeping the sidewalk, who offered a faint smile in return. Then they reached a street corner Jack usually avoided too close to the station. Too many people. But Lucky pulled the leash in that direction. Persistent. "Not today, bud," Jack said gently. Lucky pulled harder. "Come on now, we've got nothing there." But the dog didn't listen. He tugged again, not frantic, but firm. Jack sighed. All right, you're the boss." They turned the corner, and that's when Jack saw it. A small folding table. A cardboard sign that read, "Scratch-offs, $1 each. Try your luck." Behind the table sat a boy, maybe 10, 11 years old, in a red hoodie and jeans too big for his frame. He was whistling to himself and stacking lottery tickets in neat little rows. Jack would have walked past without a second thought. But Lucky barked, sharp, quick, and intentional. The boy looked up, startled. Jack froze. "Easy," he muttered. "No need to scare the kid." Lucky barked again, then sat perfectly still and stared at Jack. Not the boy. Not the tickets. Jack. "What?" Jack said, almost laughing. "What are you trying to say?" Lucky didn't move, just kept staring, steady, focused. And then Jack remembered. That first night, that throwaway line in the dark under a bridge, "If I win the lottery tomorrow," steak, real plates. He'd said it to the dog like a joke, like a wish tossed into the wind. And now here they were, in front of a lottery table. Because the dog insisted. Jack shook his head. "You serious right now?" Lucky gave a soft whine. Jack reached into his pocket, dug around, the motel room key, a crumpled receipt, and 2 single-dollar bills, still slightly damp from the wash. He looked at the money, then at Lucky. "Well," he muttered, "let's be fools together again." He stepped up to the table. The boy smiled. "You want one?" "Just one," Jack said, "whatever your luckiest one is." The boy grinned wider, picked out a bright blue ticket with gold lettering, and handed it over. Jack took it, nodded in thanks, and walked over to a low brick wall by the sidewalk. Lucky followed, tail swaying. Jack sat, pulled out his old quarter, the one he used to keep for emergencies. This sort of counted. He scratched the first box, nothing. Second, still nothing. Third box, a gold horseshoe. He paused. Fourth, another horseshoe. His fingers slowed. Fifth, the final box. He took a breath, pressed the edge of the quarter to the ticket. Another horseshoe. Jack stared. He flipped the card. Read the instructions twice. Then again. 3 matching horseshoes equals grand prize, $250,000. He blinked. His heart thudded. The air seemed to pull back, like the world was holding its breath with him. "Holy," Jack choked out. "No way, there's no way," Lucky barked once. Loud and sharp. Jack looked down at him. "You did this." The dog wagged his tail like he already knew. Jack laughed, not the kind of laugh people give when something's funny, but the kind that breaks you open. He stood up, grabbed Lucky by the sides, and pulled him into his arms. He spun, right there on the sidewalk, laughing like a man who just remembered what it felt like to be alive. People turned to look. A few smiled. One man clapped. Jack didn't care. He was laughing, crying, holding a soggy dog in his arms on a city street. And for the first time in years, he believed again. Jack Callahan didn't run to the lottery office that day. He didn't rush to cash the ticket or call the news or do what most people might do when handed $250,000 out of nowhere. He stood still, right there on the sidewalk, one hand holding a scratch-off ticket that shimmered in the sun, the other resting gently on the head of the dog that had pulled him here. Lucky sat beside him like a statue, tail swaying, tongue hanging slightly, looking proud, like he knew. Jack knelt down. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. "I don't know how or why, but we did." Lucky licked his face, quick and firm, like sealing a pact. And Jack did something he hadn't done in months. He smiled. Wide. Real, the kind that reached all the way up and made his eyes squint. Jack didn't wait for the check. Not yet. There was something else he had to do first. He walked 4 blocks slowly, like it was sacred ground, with Lucky trotting beside him, leash looped loosely through his hand. They turned a corner and stopped in front of the diner from the day before. The one with the chrome chairs and red plastic tablecloths. The one where a waitress had looked at him and his dog and said, "You got it." He pushed open the door. A little bell chimed overhead. Clara, the same waitress, glanced up from her pad and did a double take. "You again," she said, smiling. "Back so soon?" Jack nodded.
I told him we'd do steak and real plates if we hit the lottery. She raised an eyebrow. You saying you actually won? He held up the ticket. Didn't even need to speak. Her eyes widened. Well, I'll be... Jack looked at Lucky. He remembered. Dragged me to the kids selling tickets. Wouldn't let me walk past. Clara looked at the dog, then back at Jack. And you kept your word. Felt like the only thing to do. She nodded slowly. You want the same order? Exactly the same, Jack said. 2 steak dinners. Medium rare, mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables, extra side of bacon. She smiled. You got it. This time, when the food came, something felt different. Not because of the money, but because Jack wasn't ashamed to be there. Lucky sat in the chair across from him, tail drumming softly against the vinyl. The plates were full, steaming, real. Jack cut a thick slice of steak and placed it on Lucky's plate. First bite's yours, champ. Lucky took it gently, chewing like he knew he was being watched, which in fact he was. A woman at a nearby table whispered something to her friend. A teenager at the counter lifted his phone and started recording. Even the cook peeked through the pass window to catch a glimpse. Jack didn't care. He shared every bite, fork for himself, slice for Lucky. Bacon split evenly. Potatoes passed back and forth like a quiet communion. They didn't speak, of course, they didn't. But they didn't need to. This was ritual. Gratitude in action. A man keeping a promise to a dog who had no way to ask for one, but had trusted him anyway. When the last bite was gone, Jack sat back in the booth, rubbing his stomach. Lucky licked his empty plate, then looked up with bright eyes. The diner clapped, a soft, genuine ripple of applause that made Jack's face flush and his throat catch. He raised his water glass. To Lucky, he said softly, and to second chances. After they left the diner, Jack didn't head back to the motel. He went straight to the lottery office. The check was issued with a rehearsed smile from the clerk, who said something about taxes and holding periods, but Jack barely heard any of it. The weight of the paper in his hands didn't hit him the way he thought it might. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was what the money meant. He stepped outside, sun warm on his face, and crouched beside Lucky. You hungry again? Lucky barked once, not a yes, not a no, just acknowledgement. Jack smiled. Let's start making good on this. All of it. They stopped by a pet store on the way back. Jack bought a collar, soft blue with a silver tag. It read, Lucky, if found, return to Jack Callahan. He clipped it on and gave the dog a gentle pat. No more stray, he whispered. You're family now. That night, back at the motel, Jack sat on the bed while Lucky lay curled at the foot, tail tucked, breathing deep and even. Jack unfolded the check and stared at it again. $250,000. But instead of thinking about what he could buy, he thought about the bridge, the cardboard, the rain, the half sandwich he gave without hesitation, and the dog who'd stayed when he had nothing to offer. I don't want this to just fix me, he said out loud. I want it to matter. Lucky stirred slightly in his sleep. Jack looked over and smiled. We'll figure it out, together. Jack Callahan stood outside the small vet clinic, one hand gripping the check still folded in his pocket, the other resting on the back of Lucky's neck. The sign above the door read, Pine Street Animal Wellness Center. It was modest brick walls, faded trim, and a bell that jingled every time someone entered, but it felt welcoming. Real. Like the kind of place that wouldn't judge a man who walked in wearing thrift store clothes and holding the leash of a half-starved dog. They stepped inside. The warmth hit first, then the soft scent of antiseptic and peanut butter treats. Lucky sniffed the air, tail low but calm. A receptionist with kind eyes looked up from behind the desk. Appointment? Jack shook his head. Walk in. He needs everything, she smiled. We'll take good care of him. The exam room was quiet, sunlight filtering in through blinds, dust dancing in the beams. Lucky sat patiently on the table, trusting Jack even when strangers touched his ears, checked his teeth, clipped his nails. Dr. Whitaker, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a bun, inspected Lucky's ribs with a practiced hand. "He's lucky to be alive," she said softly. "Looks like he's been on the streets for a while." Jack nodded, arms crossed. "Me too." She glanced at him, reading more than he said. "You've done a good thing here. I just shared a sandwich. Sometimes that's all it takes." They vaccinated Lucky, bathed him, cleaned the old wounds. When it was done, they gave him a soft blue collar, a match to the tag Jack had picked out, and a clean bill of health. Jack reached down and scratched behind Lucky's ear. "No more hiding, huh?" The dog leaned into the touch, eyes closing with trust. That night, they didn't go back to the motel. Jack walked until he found a quiet residential street near the edge of downtown. The houses were old, some boarded up, some still breathing. He stopped in front of a small brick apartment above a closed bakery. A hand-painted sign in the bakery window read, "For rent, inquire upstairs." He stared at the sign for a long moment, then walked up the stairs. The landlady, Miss Carmen, didn't ask for references. She didn't ask what Jack did or didn't have. She looked at Lucky, then at Jack's eyes, and nodded once. "You need a place to rebuild," she said. "I've got walls that hold stories." The apartment was small. One bedroom, a narrow galley kitchen, scuffed hardwood floors, and a heater that rattled when it ran. But the windows let in morning light, and the roof didn't leak. It was perfect. Jack handed over the first 3 months' rent in cash. Miss Carmen blinked. "You sure?" "Positive." That night, Lucky curled up on a folded blanket in the corner, while Jack lay on a mattress on the floor. No furniture yet, no table. Just space, a beginning. Over the next few days, Jack kept a low profile. He bought a used table and 2 chairs, a second-hand radio, a coffee maker. He made peanut butter toast every morning and shared the crust with Lucky. They walked the neighborhood in the evenings, winding through old alleys and quiet parks. Jack didn't tell people who he was or what had happened. He didn't flaunt the money or the story. That wasn't why he was here. He didn't want to escape the past. He wanted to build forward without erasing where he came from. One morning, he passed a park bench and noticed a woman in a grey hoodie handing out bags of food to a small group gathered near the trees. There were blankets, pet food, travel-sized toiletries. Her van had a faded logo that read, "Shelter Route." Jack stopped. He watched a man cradle a small cat wrapped in a towel. A teenager gave her dog a piece of sandwich meat before taking a bite herself. He felt something pull in his chest. He had been them, just days ago. And now, with a single twist of fate and a dog who refused to let go, he had a warm bed and a future again. That night, back in the apartment, Jack sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and legal pad. He wrote, "This money is not for forgetting. It's for remembering, for using the warmth we found to build a fire for someone else." He looked over at Lucky, who lay on a rug near the door, chewing gently on a squeaky toy Jack had bought him that morning. Jack smiled. "You pulled me out," he said softly. "Now let's pull someone else." The next morning he returned to that park and waited until the woman in the grey hoodie had finished handing out supplies. He introduced himself, asked questions. How did she start? What was needed most? Where did the food come from? Were pets often left behind? By the end of the conversation, he had her contact and a volunteer slot for Saturday. He didn't tell her about the money. Not yet. He and Lucky walked home as the sun dipped low. Every few feet, someone stopped to pet the dog. Children asked his name. Elderly men nodded with approval. Lucky took it all in stride, calm, patient, gentle. Jack watched his companion with quiet awe. He had once believed he'd lost everything, but now, walking those cracked sidewalks with this dog by his side, He understood the truth. He had lost the life he built, but not the ability to build again. And this time, he wouldn't build for money or status. He would build something that lasted in the hearts of people, because real wealth wasn't in numbers. It was in promises kept, dignity restored, and the chance to start over with open hands, not closed fists. 3 weeks had passed since Jack Callahan scratched a lottery ticket beneath a flickering street lamp and found something more than money. He found meaning. Every morning since, he and Lucky followed a quiet rhythm, walks through the neighborhood, meals shared at the kitchen table, slow afternoons, sitting on park benches watching the world. Jack never craved noise or fame. He wanted to move gently, to listen more than speak, to give back without waiting for applause. But there was one thing he couldn't shake, a promise he hadn't made out loud, but one he felt deep in his chest. Don't waste the blessing. That whisper echoed inside him, especially the night he saw the shelter. It was an old building, tucked behind a row of warehouses, half forgotten, like everything else on that side of town. The roof sagged, the paint peeled, and the gate hung crooked from one rusted hinge. A handwritten sign was taped to the fence, closing soon, no more intakes. Jack stopped in front of it. Lucky sniffed the chain link, then sat quietly at his side. There were no barks, no frantic paws against the wire, just silence, the kind that settles when the world has already given up. Jack looked through the fence. Inside, a few dogs sat in makeshift kennels, some curled up in the far corners of their cages. Others simply stared through the bars, waiting for something they couldn't name. And then a voice. "You lost?" Jack turned. An older woman stood in the doorway. Grey hair tucked into a bun, hands clasped tight, like she was holding the place together with just her fingers. "No," Jack said. "I don't think so." She gave a tired smile. "Then you're one of the lucky ones." Jack looked down at Lucky. "We both are." Her name was Miss Thelma, and she had run the shelter for over 20 years. "It used to be full," she said, leading him on a short tour. "Volunteers, donors, energy, hope." Her voice cracked slightly. "Now it's just me. And a few good souls we haven't found homes for." She paused beside one kennel, where a black and white mutt pressed its nose to the bars. "I've stretched every dime. I've given up my retirement, my savings, my house. But it's not enough anymore. The city cut our funding. My vet partner retired. And people stopped coming." Jack didn't speak right away. He was watching Lucky. The dog was walking calmly along the cages, stopping at each one nose to nose with the residents like he was offering quiet comfort. Miss Thelma followed his gaze. "That's a good dog you've got there." Jack smiled. "He saved my life." She raised an eyebrow. "I was under a bridge when we met," he said. "Cold, hungry, about to give up. He didn't have anything either, but he stayed." Miss Thelma's lips tightened, then softened. "I know that kind of dog," she whispered. They sat down at a dusty folding table in her office. She poured them both coffee, hers black, his with powdered creamer. "I'm trying to hold out until the end of the month," she said, "but I've already started making calls, seeing if anyone can take the dogs. I won't let them go to the city pound, I won't." Jack nodded slowly. "How much would you need to keep it running?" She laughed. A soft, bitter sound. "More than anyone's got lying around." Jack reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded check. She didn't look at it at first. When she did, her hand trembled. She read the number once. Then again. Her voice broke. You can't be serious." "I'm not giving it to you," Jack said gently. "I'm investing in something that saved me. I just want one thing." She wiped at her eyes. "What's that?" He pointed toward Lucky, who was now lying beside one of the older dogs, front paws stretched out, tail gently wagging. "Call it Lucky's place, because he's the reason I'm standing here." Miss Thelma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You got it." 2 days later, the sign changed.
The crooked gate was straightened. The paint was fresh. Volunteers returned. Supplies arrived. A new vet agreed to donate time each week. Someone donated blankets. Another brought toys. And at the front of the shelter, beside a pot of yellow mums, a carved wooden plaque was installed. Lucky's Place, where second chances begin with a wag and a whisper. Jack didn't want credit. He didn't give interviews. He never stood in front of a camera. But the story got out anyway. A reporter from the local paper came by, asking questions. Jack only said one sentence before politely stepping away. He was just a stray, but he saw me when no one else did. That weekend, a family came in looking for a dog. The kids ran straight to a scruffy little terrier. The dad paused to read the plaque. "Lucky's Place, huh?" he said aloud. Lucky, resting by the reception desk, wagged his tail in reply. Back at home, Jack sat by the window, watching the rain come down in soft, diagonal lines. Lucky lay curled at his feet, a new tag jingling when he stirred. Jack sipped his coffee. He thought about the first night they met, the wet cardboard, the half sandwich, the shared silence. And now, a roof, a shelter, a future, all because of a promise whispered in the dark, steak and real plates. It had started with that, but now it was so much more. The old garage on River Street had been empty for over a decade. Its windows were dusted with grime, its roof sagged like a tired shoulder, and the rusted roll-up door hadn't moved in years. The "For Lease" sign out front was so faded it had become part of the wall, not an invitation, but a resignation. But Jack Callahan saw something else. Not a wreck, not a liability. He saw potential. Not just in the building, but in what it could become for people like him. People who'd lost everything, not just money or a job, but the part of themselves that felt useful, capable, human. So he called the number, met with the owner, and bought the place in cash. No paperwork delays. No brokers. Just a firm handshake and a promise. I'm going to build something that matters here. He spent the next week hauling out old equipment, patching walls, and sanding down surfaces. He fixed what was salvageable, replaced what was too far gone. He painted the walls a soft, warm grey, the color of clouds just before they break into light. Repaired the windows so the sun could stream in again. Installed workbenches from reclaimed wood and organized tools with the same care he used to give his own workshop before the fire. Lucky watched every move, always nearby, always still. He'd sit on an old folded quilt by the front entrance, tail swishing softly as Jack worked. Sometimes people walking by would stop and ask, "What is this going to be?" Jack always gave the same answer with a shrug and a smile. Not sure yet. Maybe a place to build more than furniture. It started with one man, Reggie. He was in his 40s, wiry, with worn boots and a quiet voice. Jack met him at a local shelter while delivering supplies with Miss Thelma's crew. Reggie had been a roofer once. Then he fell. 2 crushed ribs, prescription painkillers, then the spiral. Jack asked him, "You ever work with wood?" Reggie nodded. "Used to. Miss it." Jack gave him the address. "Come by Monday. You don't need to bring anything, just show up." He did. Jack handed him a set of safety goggles and a sander. By the end of the day, Reggie had built the legs of a bench and something else, too, a smile that actually touched his eyes. Then came Teresa. She'd been a cabinet maker in a past life, before her divorce left her homeless and sleeping in a car with her teenage son. She knew how to carve dovetail joints by hand. She showed Jack how to fix a warped drawer slide using only a mallet and her shoulder. Then Malik, the same boy who sold Jack the winning lottery ticket, showed up one afternoon just to say hi. He ended up helping Jack install overhead lighting and came back every day after school. Before long, there were 6 people working in the shop regularly. Then 10.
No formal name, no business plan. Just a hand-painted sign over the doorway that said, "Welcome back." Jack didn't run it like a job site. He ran it like a sanctuary. There were no punch clocks, no quotas, no pressure. You came if you wanted to learn. You stayed if you wanted to heal. They built tables, chairs, planter boxes for the community garden down the block, bookcases donated to the local library. One man made a rocking horse for his daughter, a daughter he hadn't seen in 2 years until Jack helped him reconnect with social services. Every project had a story, and every person had a place. Lucky became the heart of the workshop. He was the first face newcomers saw when they walked through the door, sitting proudly by the entrance like a guardian. People petted him before they picked up a tool. They talked to him when they couldn't talk to anyone else. Some cried beside him when the memories hit too hard. Lucky never moved, just sat, listened, and leaned into their legs with quiet strength.
"Therapy dog?" someone asked once. Jack smiled. "No. Just a dog who understands." One afternoon, a young man named Darnell arrived. He didn't speak much, didn't even take off his hoodie. Just stared at the workbench like it was some kind of test he knew he'd fail. Jack didn't ask questions. He handed Darnell a piece of sandpaper and a block of wood. "Start here. Just smooth the edges." An hour passed, then another. Then Darnell spoke. "My dad used to make stuff before he left." Jack didn't reply. He didn't need to. They sanded in silence for the next hour. The next day, Darnell came back. Word spread. People who'd been forgotten found themselves building again, not just furniture, but confidence, routine, purpose. Jack kept his promise to himself. He didn't use the workshop to make money. He funded it from his winnings, donations, and grants. Miss Thelma helped him apply for. Everything they sold went straight back into materials and food stipends for the volunteers. No one left with cash in hand, but everyone left with something more valuable: dignity. One Saturday, a local news station did a small segment on the shop. The anchor called it "The Workshop That Rebuilds Lives." Jack hated the attention, but when they asked what inspired it, he didn't hesitate. He pointed at Lucky, who was dozing in a sunbeam on the floor. "Him. He reminded me I still mattered. Now I try to do the same." That evening, Jack sat on the steps outside the shop. The door was still open, letting the scent of sawdust drift into the spring air. Inside, a new shelf stood proudly in the corner, crafted by 3 hands, none of them Jack's. Lucky lay beside him, head on his paws, tail twitching every now and then. Jack looked down at him. "You know," he said softly, "I thought I was building a place for others. But turns out I was building us a home too." Lucky didn't move, just gave one soft wag of the tail. And for Jack, that was answer enough. By spring, the workshop had become more than a place to build furniture. It had become a place to rebuild people. But for Jack Callahan, that still wasn't enough. He'd seen too much, sat on too many freezing sidewalks, shared too many silent meals with men and women who once had jobs, homes, dreams, now sleeping with their backs against concrete and their arms around shivering dogs. He couldn't forget them, and he didn't want to, because he had been them. And someone had stayed with him when no one else did. His name was Lucky. Jack didn't start with a plan. Just a cardboard box and a folding table. Every Saturday morning, he loaded that box with sandwiches, apples, bottles of water, dog food, treats, and soft blankets rolled tight. Lucky sat in the passenger seat of an old van. Jack had refurbished himself. White paint, no logo, just clean and quiet. He called it the Hope Route. He didn't announce it, he just showed up. Under bridges, in alleys, near soup kitchens, at the edge of parks where others didn't dare to go. And word traveled fast, Not because Jack gave out food, plenty of groups did that, but because he gave out respect. He knelt when he spoke to people, looked them in the eyes, asked their names, their stories, their dogs' names too. He brought kibble in Ziploc bags, collars in different sizes, leashes that didn't fray, squeaky toys, a travel bowl, even tiny birthday hats for one man's elderly chihuahua. And always Lucky. Tail wagging, eyes gentle, he didn't bark or flinch. He simply walked up, sat close, and let himself be trusted. One afternoon, Jack stopped at a patch of sidewalk where a man sat with a cardboard sign that read, "Disabled. Anything helps." God bless. Beside him was a brindled pit bull, ribs showing, head resting on the man's thigh. Jack offered food, then knelt. "Mind if I sit?" The man shrugged. "Sure, no one usually asks." Jack smiled. "My name's Jack." "This here's Lucky." The man's face lit up as Lucky approached, tail wagging slowly. "He looks like my dog," the man whispered, eyes wet. "Lost him in Iraq. Bomb took my squad and my best friend." Lucky sat down beside him, pressed his body gently into the man's side and stayed. For 10 full minutes. No barking, no judgment, just presence. When Jack stood to leave, the man looked up. "You named him right, Lucky." Jack nodded, voice soft. "He's the reason I'm here." The next week, more people waited. They knew the sound of the van, the sight of the soft blue collar. Kids would run to the edge of the sidewalk yelling, "It's Lucky." Veterans gave quiet salutes. Even some city workers, the kind who used to look away, now paused and said, "Morning, Jack." Jack had never wanted attention, but he couldn't ignore momentum, so he gave it a name. He registered a small non-profit called From the Streets to Hope. No fancy website, no press release, just a mission to serve the unseen. Man and dog alike. He partnered with local vets to offer pop-up clinics in parking lots, free vaccines, checkups, flea treatments. He hosted grooming days where volunteers brushed out matted fur and handed out clean blankets. And always Lucky was there. People opened up to Lucky in ways they couldn't with each other. They told him their stories, cried into his fur, whispered secrets they hadn't spoken in years. He listened. Because that's what dogs do when they love you. And Lucky, he had more love than most humans Jack had ever met. Local grocery stores began donating leftover food. A woman who'd once been homeless and now owned a catering truck started preparing Saturday lunches for the route. Teenagers from the local high school collected chew toys and wrote handwritten notes. "To your pup, you matter too. Hang in there, friend. Love from someone rooting for you." Each bag Jack handed out carried not just food, but dignity. And slowly, something incredible began to happen. People who had once given up began to try again. Some asked how to get into shelters. Others came to the workshop to learn skills. One woman with a 3-legged dog named Duke got a part-time job cleaning at a vet clinic. "I think Duke was proud of me," she told Jack one morning, eyes shining. Jack smiled. "I know the feeling." And still he refused to live big, no mansion, no luxury car, just the small apartment above the bakery, his boots by the door, Lucky's bed beside the heater. They walked the park every evening. Lucky never needed a leash anymore. He never wandered far. And every night, Jack looked up at the sky and whispered the same thing. "Let me stay useful." Because money could run out. But purpose, if shared right, could multiply. One Friday evening, Jack returned to the workshop to lock up. The lights were off. The floor swept clean. But on the workbench sat something new, a carved wooden plaque. He stepped closer and read it aloud. "To Jack and Lucky for seeing us when no one else did." His hand trembled as he traced the letters. Behind him, Lucky padded in from the doorway, tail swishing gently. Jack turned, knelt down,
and hugged his dog tight. "We're not done," he whispered. "Not even close." Lucky licked his cheek, then leaned his head into Jack's shoulder. And in that quiet workshop under soft lights and dust-filled air, Jack felt something bigger than luck, bigger than redemption. He felt belonging, not just for himself, but for every soul who had ever sat in the dark, praying for a sign that they still mattered. The breeze in the park that afternoon was soft. Late spring sunlight filtered through tall oak trees, painting the grass in long golden streaks. Dandelions floated lazily in the air. Children's laughter rang in the distance, blending with the hum of wind chimes from a nearby porch. But near the edge of the grass, a modest crowd had gathered. No banners, no balloons, just folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a small podium, and a polished granite bench nestled beneath the shade of a great oak. Jack Callahan stood off to the side, one hand gripping a leash, the other adjusting the collar of a borrowed suit. It didn't fit perfectly, but it was pressed, clean, and chosen with care. Beside him, as always, sat Lucky. Older now, a little greyer around the muzzle, but still strong, still steady, and still the heartbeat of everything Jack had built. The State Rescue Network was presenting its annual Companion of the Year award. But this time, it wasn't going to a police dog or a service animal. It was going to a stray, to a dog who had once shivered beneath a bridge, to a dog who had saved a man who had nothing left. When the director stepped up to the microphone, the wind stilled like the world knew it was time to listen. "There are some stories," she said, "that begin with a bark and end with a legacy." She spoke of Lucky, how he had comforted the forgotten, walked hundreds of miles beside Jack, and sat quietly beside dozens of strangers in their most vulnerable moments. She spoke of Jack not as a lottery winner, but as a builder, a listener, a man who made good on a promise whispered in the dark. Then she held up a small glass frame and a brass medallion engraved with a pawprint. "To Lucky," she said, her voice warm. "A companion in the truest sense." The crowd clapped, not wildly, not for show. It was a ripple of gratitude, soft and full of reverence. Jack knelt, clipped the medal onto Lucky's collar, and whispered, "You earned this." Then he walked to the podium. He placed one hand on the wooden bench as he passed. Words had been carved into it with care. "To the dog who reminded me I still mattered." He looked out at the crowd. There were volunteers from the shelter, apprentices from the workshop, people from the Hope route. Even Malik, the boy in the red hoodie who once sold Jack a winning lottery ticket, stood near the back, now taller and smiling proudly. Jack took a breath. "When I first met Lucky," he said, voice low, "I had nothing, not even a reason to wake up the next day." He paused, looked down at his dog, who sat silently by his feet. But he stayed. He didn't ask for anything. He just stayed. Jack's voice didn't tremble. It carried. "Lucky didn't just save me. He showed me that I could still offer something to the world, that I could still be something in it. He didn't heal me with words. He did it with presence, with trust." He glanced at the bench again, and everything we built after that, the shelter, the workshop, the route, it started with him. With a shared sandwich, a soaked coat, and a promise I never thought I'd have to keep. He stepped back, hands relaxed at his sides. "I thought I was the one rescuing him," he finished. "But in truth, I think he rescued all of us." People wiped their eyes. The applause returned gentle, steady, and full of love. And as the sun slipped lower across the park, Jack and Lucky took their seats together on the bench side by side, like they always had. They didn't need to speak. The silence between them said enough. That night, the local newspaper ran a photo on its front page. It showed Jack sitting on the bench, one hand stroking Lucky's head, the other resting on the engraved plaque. The headline read, "The dog who delivered hope, one paw print at a time." The article told of the journey, from under a bridge to a diner booth with steak and real plates, to a shelter renamed in his honor, to a workshop without walls, to the hearts of hundreds who had once been invisible. And through it all, there had been Lucky. Back at home, in the apartment above the bakery, Jack brewed a cup of tea. Lucky lay in his usual spot, head on a soft pillow, tail thumping when Jack passed. Jack sat beside him, gazing out the window. The lights of the city blinked quietly beyond the glass. "You know," he said, voice gentle, "we never bought a mansion, never went on a cruise, never spent that money the way people expected." Lucky looked up, ears twitching. Jack smiled, "But I think we spent it the right way." He leaned down and kissed the top of Lucky's head. "Because we didn't just survive, buddy. We mattered." In the months that followed, Jack continued his roots, continued his mentoring, continued to greet every newcomer with open hands and no judgment. And Lucky? He stayed. By the door of the workshop, at the passenger seat of the van, at the side of every outstretched hand, every hurting heart, every silent story still waiting to be told. He had once been nameless. Now he was legend. And so, a man who had lost everything found purpose in the eyes of a forgotten dog, not because of luck, but because of love. The kind of love that asks for nothing and gives everything. A love that builds benches and shelters and meals in Ziploc bags. A love that doesn't just change lives, it restores them. Life doesn't always fall apart in one moment sometimes. It unravels slowly. But as this story reminds us, hope can also return the same way, one act of kindness at a time. Jack Callahan had lost everything, his wife, his home, his purpose. Yet, in a moment of quiet generosity, he shared half a sandwich and an old jacket with a stray dog. That simple choice changed both of their lives. This story teaches us that dignity can be rebuilt, not through wealth or recognition, but through companionship, promises kept, and showing up even when you have little to give. Lucky didn't speak, but his loyalty, presence, and silent understanding reminded Jack that he still mattered. Together, they turned pain into purpose and survival into service. For older Americans who've weathered storms of their own, this tale isn't just heartwarming, it's deeply relatable. It reminds us that no one is ever too lost, too old, or too broken to begin again. Sometimes, all it takes is a warm hand, a shared meal, or a quiet companion to guide you back to life. And when you've made it through, pass it on. Someone out there needs your story.